What's up, Internet? Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Cigar City Book Club. I'm your host, Thad Diaz, author of the Cigar City Case Files, a hard-boiled detective series that takes place in Tampa and centers on an active-duty firefighter who's a bail bondsman and a PI on his days off. Today I wanted to talk a little bit more. We already touched on him during the coffee break segment, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about Harry Bosch, about what makes him work, about why I love him. I think why we all love him, right? And that is, and there's just a couple things, and we'll talk about that. But Harry, Harry's been around a minute. Harry's been around since the early '90s. Other people have come and gone. Other people have kind of risen. Other characters have risen to kind of some heights and then faded into the background, and other people have taken their place. But not Harry. Harry's, we're making shows. We're making books expanded in that series. And the question is, what makes that? Why is that? What makes Harry so different than some other folks? I'm not going to mention, but what makes it? What makes him different? And I think the number one answer is that Harry Bosch is a man on a mission, right? Harry is different. He is uncompromising. Uncompromising men are easier to love. What movie is that from? Leave it in the comments if you know. And I did just date myself. But what is it about? He's an uncompromising man on a mission. He often will pursue relentlessly justice, regardless of who the victim is, who the perpetrator is, and what it cost him. And he does pay a real price for some of his misadventures that he does for the right reasons. He pays a heavy price in his personal life. His career is set back. We actually get to see all of that happen on the page. And I think that's really cool. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of his personality quirks and some of the things that he pays. But, Connolly surrounds him with a cast of characters that puts him, especially in the early books, that kind of puts this on display. Irving, the bureaucrat who cares only about the reputation of the department, not justice. Pounds, who is his lieutenant, who's a guy who absolutely cares only about the stats and not justice at all. And J. Edgar, who's his sometimes Harry, sometimes partner, who is a good, competent cop, but he wants to make his nut and go home. And he doesn't have that same mission-driven mindset that Harry does. And that creates problems with all three of them. And, especially the first two, I think, go to another big aspect of what makes Harry Bosch great. And that is the city of Los Angeles as character as much as setting. You feel that city and its corruption and its problems and its chaos. And it's more than just pretty sunsets and beautiful drives through the Cahuenga Pass or even the gritty Hollywood streets. You get a feel that this is a living, breathing place. And some of the characters, while they definitely feel like they're natural, living, breathing characters, but they also feel like they're part of that city. They actually are, and they represent that city in a way that puts Harry a little out of step with them, or a lot out of step with them. And even though I think Harry has this kind of codependency on the city, on the job, and that city feeds that job, I think he also is very out of step with the city's code and the way that it gets through. And I think that that's an outstanding. I think that is something that Michael Connolly does very, very well. So it's the city being character as much and an opposing force against Harry as much as the characters are or the villain is, right? Another thing is that Harry, we talked about this a little bit before, but Harry pays a real price for being who he is, right? And he changes and develops over the years. And I think that's another thing. A lot of these guys, like I'm a big fan of Marlowe and Spade and Archer. We talked about all those guys before. I mentioned them before. But the thing about those guys is they're kind of two-dimensional. I mean, I love them, right? They're a lot of fun. They're good for, but they are two-dimensional, and Harry is not. Harry develops. He has very complex feelings. He has relationship problems. His mission does create real problems for him in ways that these other two-dimensional characters, they don't really do. From book to book, it's like each one is a new adventure, but they're the same guy at the beginning of that as they were. The Harry Bosch, who's pursuing justice in Angel's Flight, is not the same guy who punches his way through The Last Coyote. And I think that's really, really important. Lastly, I want to talk. The last thing I think that Connolly does a really good job of is he treats the reader with respect. You don't want, he has very well thought out mysteries that are complex without being convoluted. Everything works. Everything makes sense. It's not some weird, crazy plan. Every once in a while, it gets a little. It walks the line, but it's always complex without being convoluted. And Harry, doesn't do the typical summation like where he pulls everybody into the room like you'll see in a Poirot novel where, by Agatha Christie. By the way, I love Agatha Christie and I love Hercule Poirot. We might even talk about him on this show, on this channel. But right now, that's something that I like that Michael Connelly does with Bosch, that you just don't feel like you're being pandered to. You don't feel like he's talking down. You're trying to connect every single dot to show you how, either look at all the work I did, how intricate this really was and how it really works. Or, hey, I know you're not really smart enough to kind of pick up on this. So let me put every little click together, every detail and a line. He covers most of it, but he doesn't. And it not always in the same segment. And I like that. I like that he trusts me to be smart enough to put the rest together. I think that's great. And I appreciate that about him. And so I don't feel like pandered to or insulted, when I read a Harry Bosch book. And sometimes I wouldn't say I feel insulted, but it's like, bro, yeah, I got that. Believe it or not, I was on that. I figured that out. And I respect that. As a reader, I really appreciate being respected that way. But really, that's it. That's where we're at. So those are the main things. I mean, there's a lot of things to love about Harry. We could talk about all kinds of things, but we'd be here 5 hours, right? So what about you? What are your favorite aspects of Harry Bosch? Who's your favorite fictional detective? We might even do him one day, right? We got lots of time. But let me know. Keep the conversation going. Leave a comment below. But in the meantime, we will do some more segments, so stay tuned right here at this channel. I'll talk to y'all later.